Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom. In step 10, we continued to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So I love step 10. It's one of my favorites because it's also highly practical. Lars, why don't you tell us first, how did you find doing step 10? How did you approach it?
Well, it's one of my favorites too. And I think probably because, to me at least, at this point in the process, I felt quite relieved that I had been helped so tremendously when I came to this point. So I think I almost felt like having my own little party, to be honest. It was really, given where I came from, where I had been so affected by what I've been working on with the pride and the self-criticism and feeling alone in the world, basically all of that. And now then just having this sense of everything, that was what it felt like, everything has changed. And change is really possible. So there was so much joy around this point. So to be honest, the first time I went through it, I think I was a bit overwhelmed by joy, and therefore maybe not totally focused on all the things that needed to be done to maintain what I had received. Later on, as I've been traveling in the steps, that has become more and more important to me. These tools that we receive in step 10 to maintain the peace and the freedom that we experienced in the first part of the process. I could speak longer about that, but I think that this is my initial response.
And how about you, Jamie?
Well, I absolutely loved step 10. I mean, I'd always been somebody who would keep a journal for a long, long time and write my reflections. And so I started to keep a daily record inventory about 3 years ago. And it's given so many insights and clarity on the rhythm that works best for me. That's been huge. It's really kept me on track with the decisions made at step 7. What's the replacement strategy? It's really given me a sense of gratitude, actually, and appreciation for each day, as I've kind of not just let the day go, but stopped, paused at the end and thought, okay, what was great in this day? What do I appreciate about this day? Okay, let's be honest. Some of this behavior today in this conversation was a little bit like the behavior I didn't want. That's okay. It's made me aware. So yeah, I really, really loved step 10.
I also did, and I think in the book it talks about life being more of a marathon rather than a sprint, and how we need to do training and things. And I think the way that I would approach my life is, I need to get to the marathon stage without doing any of the work before. And I kind of saw freedom as this thing that I needed to kind of run towards super fast without kind of thinking about, or what does freedom look like in the kind of the training, rather than kind of this elusive thing at the end. And so the idea of breaking it down to look at, okay, well, actually, what does freedom look like for me on a daily basis was really helpful for me. And the kind of drink stations that we talk about in the book, about what are your healthy rhythms, and like you said, Jamie, the inventory at the end of the day, I wasn't really a reflective person beforehand, and I didn't really see the value of it because I was always go, go, go. But I've really learned the beauty of slowing down and stopping enough to reflect. And I found that there is so much freedom in that. And I think before I would have seen that as something that would hold me back, if that makes sense. So in terms of me pacing myself and pacing my own kind of healing and recovery, I think it's just provided a bit more of a framework for me. I remember reading Stephen Covey's book on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and in it he talks about aligning your vision and values with your kind of timetable, and how so often our daily lives don't reflect the values that we hold really close to us. And so since doing steps, I've become really passionate about actually making sure, if I really value freedom and if I'm really valuing having a healthy view of myself, my behaviors day to day need to reflect that. So I was working on fear of rejection, and I've worked on low self-worth. But what I realized was that when I looked at my day to day, I wasn't really doing anything to look after myself. I was just giving out to other people. And so I think this is why I'm really passionate about Step 10, because it provides a practical way that we can look at our days and see if they reflect what we're kind of, the freedom that we're looking for.
Yeah, I just want to double click on what you said there, Lou. I really resonate with what you're saying. And you talked about having a healthy view on yourself. And I think that's absolutely key. One of the things I discovered as I was walking through the steps process, not so much first time, but actually second or third time, was that I had really been a bad friend to myself. I had regarded the welfare of other persons way more important than my own. I had regarded it okay that I didn't feel okay as long as other people were fine. Things like that. And not for heroic reasons, really. I wish it were, but that was not it wasn't really self-sacrifice in a good sense of the word. It was something else unhealthy going on in my life. So therefore, the whole drink station idea in Step 10, to actually take care of ourselves, to look after ourselves, to show healthy self-love in a practical way. I mean, for me, that was really an eye-opener, that this is part of healthy life. Not only to have an eye on God and what He wants, an eye on other people, what they need, but also an eye on myself. And to be honest, I'm not sure the spirituality that I was brought up in encouraged that a lot. So there was definitely a process, and to some degree there still is, where I need to kind of have a little bit of a overcoming part of my spiritual heritage, to grapple with Step 10 in a good way.
I think that's why so many of us, when we get to Step 10, is like, oh, wow, because we live in a culture that doesn't necessarily value some of these things, or we don't take the time. Well, I guess I'm speaking for myself, not really taking the time to think about these things. And actually then it feels a breath of fresh air to think, okay, well, how am I looking after myself, and what are my drink stations? And it scares me sometimes how often I get to this point. I'm like, oh, I have not been prioritizing this. And so it feels like such a relief to get to this point.
Yeah, a really great thing for me was in the Step 10 really cultivated was, say before steps, I might once a month go on my bike and listen to podcasts. And I thought, actually, I really, really enjoy this, and I really, really need this. This is replenishing, it's refreshing, it revitalizes me, but I'm only giving myself once a month. And I realized, actually, I need that more often. And I would start to build that into my work rhythm. I've always been refreshed by being on my own, emotionally refreshed. I withdraw, I'm on my own, and then I'm emotionally recharged. But I realized through the inventory, but what makes a great day isn't being on my own. That emotionally refreshes me. What makes a great day is connection, people, and community. That is never a great day if it's all on my own. It can be an emotionally recharging, but I need community. And I think it was the inventory that really woke me up and thought, when it's a great day, when I reflect back and think, wow, this day really was so good, I'm alive and buzzing, it was because it was with people, community, collaboration, and loving service of people, which I guess takes us later on to step 12, that important step.
I think it's so helpful to identify what drink stations are. And it sounds like you've really identified yours and you know now what makes a good day. Lars, why don't you share some of your drink stations?
Yeah, so for me, definitely part of mine was also to look after my physical health, to make sure I had time to either run or walk, things like that. Spiritually, I realized early on in the steps process that going on an annual silent retreat, which isn't perhaps for everyone, but for me, that was really refreshing. And it really helped because it somehow connected me to the grace of God, which is the antidote to pride, really. So it also became my way of making amends to myself, really. So in a way, step 9 and 10 blended in, because my way of making amends to myself was actually also the healthy rhythm that I needed. And I have increasingly found that when people ask, so how do I make amends to myself? Well, go to step 10 and find your healthy rhythm and prioritize that. That's very often, maybe more than 80% of the cases, what you need to make amends to yourself. So fortunately, my family agreed that it was a good idea. They liked the version of me coming back from the retreats. So that was definitely one of the things as well.
I think there's something really important there about making amends to yourself, because I think what held me back making practical amends to myself was the feeling of guilt. So I would feel, so a small example, when I had really young kids, Dan, my husband, was working, and for me to have a break would involve paying for a babysitter. And I just felt too guilty. I was like, well, if I could do it, I should do it. And someone really wisely said to me, don't wait until you don't feel guilty, because then you'll never do it, but start doing it and you'll see the benefits and the guilt will lift. And I've really noticed that in drink stations, as I've gone to look after myself in different ways, I've felt kind of awful almost at the beginning, because I was like, oh, this is new, this is uncomfortable, I'm not really loving this. And then I would start seeing the benefits. I would see that I had more energy, more joy, more capacity for other people. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I should have started this ages ago. But sometimes I think our bodies remember and our minds remember how we've done things up until that point, and it's hard to change. And so step 10 is also about learning a new way of doing things and kind of riding out some of the uncomfortable feelings that come up when we do. So one way I've done my drink stations is I've written out a little quadrant, and I've looked at my spiritual, physical, emotional, and relational needs, and what are my drink stations within each of those, because I know my tendency might be to focus on some, not others. And I've just found that this is quite a holistic way of looking at my well-being. So I might say, okay, what am I doing spiritually? What is my spiritual drink station? And that is, for me, taking time out to pray and read my Bible every day, but also what are my relational needs? And for a long time, when I had young children at home, I was so kind of focused on looking after them that I wasn't really looking at, well, who am I connecting with? And sometimes, Dan would get home and we'd both be so exhausted that we wouldn't connect. So it's like, okay, well, every day I know that I need really strong connection with someone. And then so I've taken each one in turn and really stopped to think, okay, what are my needs? A bit like you were saying, Jamie, like, what do I need out of every day? And how can I make sure that can happen? And for me, I guess I just really identify with what you were saying, Lars, about
making amends being so much part of step 10, because that's definitely been and continues to be my experience.
And I think we don't always notice the cumulative effect of small, tiny decisions. And I think the inventory just brings that to the forefront and brings awareness to it. For example, I'd be honest in my inventory and say, okay, ruminating, analytical conversations are not healthy. And so sometimes I'd look back and see day after day after day of ruminating conversations rooted in over-responsibility. And the inventory would just say, look, that's the cumulative effect of that is eroding hope, and it's eroding serenity and peace and rest. So I think that the inventory is a great way of keeping a record and saying, oh, I haven't seen the kind of change in that area that I really need to change. What small thing each day needs to adjust in maybe my relationship with God spiritually or socially, or the way I communicate. So the cumulative effect over time is going to be greater and greater freedom. And I think freedom is a tangible experience. I think we can measure it. I know if I'm in acceptance and serenity. I know my internal world will tell me, and the inventory says, okay, your internal world is being created through these small daily practices or bad habits. And I guess that's what the Bible would talk about. We reap what we sow.
I so agree with that, Jamie. And there is really a high value in this inventory practice. And I think joy is a key to it, really. So it's not a depressive discipline where I am looking for areas to improve. That's not the nature of it. It's more a relational nature, really. It's like I'm journeying through this life with God as my higher power, and I am adjusting my way of seeing him as I'm adjusting my way of seeing myself. And I realize those two things are strongly connected. So to give an example, it's really odd sometimes, also in comparison to what you say, Lou, that how hard we can be on ourselves. Incredibly hard. Because if we think about those of us who are parents, or those of us who are just close to small children, how do we really relate to them? Well, we are basically happy when they are happy. And we are not happy when they are not happy. We are happy when they take good care of themselves. And when they are destructive in their behavior towards themselves, we are extremely unhappy. So how do we think God thinks about us? And of course, that is a reflection, an imperfect reflection of God. So if we feel like that, how much more him? How much more joy in heaven when we are actually living joyfully as children, not being hard on ourselves, but actually receiving grace, receiving love, and living in joy of what God has given to us in this life, instead of punishing ourselves or demanding the impossible of ourselves. And I think that's extremely important, not only image of myself as I'm engaging with this inventory exercise, but also really to live in what we experience throughout the first steps of God really is the God of grace. That's who he is. That's in his heart. That is his nature. That is what comes from him. It's his source. His source is grace. So I think that's just a hugely important part of it. And I think we can't really, at the end of the day, we can't distinguish between the two. I can't have a really positive, healthy image of myself unless I have it of God, and vice versa.
So with that perspective, which is really helpful, how do you practically do your daily inventory?
Well, my daily inventory is the last thing of the day. It's probably done in 2 steps. It's the end of a working day, and that's often the spiritual reflections, the things that I've heard God say, the wisdom I've received from other people, the reflections on circumstances and what I think they're teaching me. I also want to note down what was meaningful about that day. what actually was meaningful work that day, where you come away thinking that was good. And I like to define meaningful work in relation to step 12. Did it lead to loving service of people? That's what I'm really looking for in whatever it is, whether it's thinking, writing, this podcast. It's got to be loving service of people. I also use the inventory to reflect backwards at maybe a key thing that God has said. So I have the date at the top, and then I have a number, and it will be, the number will reflect how many days ago did I hear that thing. So when I write the inventory, I'm reminded again that a number of days previous, something really important was, I received something really important. I don't want to forget that, because that's really important. And I guess the other part, if I'm honest, I look at the day and say, okay, in this area of, say, over responsibility, have I fallen into practices and habits that reflect a behavior that's taking me where I don't want to go? And I don't do it in a harsh way. I just say, oh, can't believe it. Crazy, I know. This is insane. Better get into that conversation.
To me, the inventory represents a principle, really. It's about a healthy awareness of how I live with God, myself, and others. So for me, the way it works out is that I do it in periods. So I don't always do it. And when I'm on a course, then I do it as pretty much like Jamie describes it. I don't do it in a written form. I just do it I use my kind of inner world. So I walk through the day with Jesus and just ask him about the day, really. How did you turn up? How did you show yourself? And how was it? And then when there are happy points, I stop at those. And when there are sore points, I stop at those and surrender it, either in a thanksgiving or in a prayer, depending on what kind of point it is. So that helps me with keeping the awareness. So I use the exercise when I feel like I'm slipping on the healthy awareness. Then I kind of go back to that as a specific exercise, which for me also would be at the end of the day.
When I first started doing it, I made the mistake of doing it once I turned my light out. I don't think I ever got past morning or I was asleep. So now I've changed it and I do it with my light on. And I actually journal it now because it helps me focus more. And I think one of the things that I do, and you might disagree, well, not disagree with this, Lars, but kind of, I'm not sure if it goes against what you were saying, but one of the things I do is I look back on my day and I think, okay, what were the negative thoughts and disturbing thoughts I've had? Because I sometimes find that I veer towards the negative and that kind of sits in me a bit. And then I ask myself, okay, is that true? What does God say? And then I meditate on a short Bible verse. I write down 3 things that I was grateful for that day. And then I do a quick prayer of kind of thanks and just reminding myself of God's truths. And this doesn't take me more than 3-4 minutes. But I found that at least for this period of time, I need to be doing something every day, because otherwise I don't prioritize it. And the other thing that I find really helpful about this is that in step 10, it talks about promptly admitting and confessing. And actually, for me, what I was doing is I wasn't doing that. And as a result, I was almost carrying around layers of shame and feeling bad about things. And actually, when I say confess very quickly to God, I don't spend a long time over it, but I know that it's done and dealt with, and I can live free from that without me carrying it around with me. So I've definitely found doing that every day with the light on is really helpful exercise.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's when I really focus in the inventory on gratitude, appreciation, and thanks. So I'm looking back on the moments where it was really funny, where someone in the family did something hilarious, or there was a conversation that just made us all laugh for ages. And I might put a headline, or if we've been to the cinema, I take a movie still and then I put it in the inventory. And then as I go back, I can see the films or food. We had a really good meal. I write down what was the meal, what was the wine, and then I can and it creates in me a real looking back with joy and gratitude, and it really has hugely affected one area. For example, I can be more in the melancholic. I know I can look back and not appreciate and not see and not notice, but having this record of an inventory confronts me with, actually, this is the reality of things. There is so many good things going on, and helps me appreciate that and notice it afresh.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think I find it really helpful to remind myself what I'm thankful for, what the good moments were, and actually stop to be grateful for that. And definitely over time, what I've noticed since doing this inventory is I'm having less negative thoughts in the day. I'm enjoying the smaller things, like a lovely cup of tea or when the sun's shining. And since I started my inventory, not every day, but some days I just have less to write in terms of some of the negative stuff, because it feels like I've had a perspective change. And I'm really excited about that, because that translates as me feeling freer and accessing some of the freedom that we can kind of, as I said before, talk about quite kind of elusively. I actually feel more free and less enslaved as a person. So let's just talk as we close about what encouragements we would give to someone who is at step 10. I'll kick us off and say that my number one encouragement is actually to take time over the drink stations, because I think sometimes we can rush through it and not really think about, okay, what do I actually need? What are my needs and what refreshes me? And to, even if it's just one thing to put into place, pick one thing to put into place to kind of give yourself more of a break and refreshment. That's my thing. Lars, how about you?
My thing is exactly the same as your thing. Honestly, because when I'm reading the chapter today, I'm a bit like, did you go a bit overboard when you wrote that book? Because there's a lot in that chapter. And it's even reduced to half the size from when it was originally written. So I think I was quite excited at that point when I wrote the book. But I think it's still good that there is plenty in there, because like you say, Lou, then you can pick one thing. And I so much agree with that. I think that is the secret to that chapter, or that part of the process. Pick one thing. And when you start a new rhythm, follow the advice of the old desert fathers and mothers, who said that when you are changing a habit, when you're starting something new, start with something that is almost so small that you would despise it. And that's provocative, but I know what they mean. What they say is it's much more important with the repetitive thing, that you keep doing it day by day. That's important. Not the amount of what you're doing, not the quantity, but the quality of what you do, and then you do it repetitively. So basically, I'm saying the same thing as you, Lou.
Yeah. It takes something like 60 days to form a new habit. So
I would say as well, it's a great way to celebrate the smallest of victories. Keep a record of the smallest of victories and notice those things. And I think one of the great things of the inventory as well is its transformative effect upon spirituality. Because I agree with you, Lars. I think sometimes we've got into ideas around spiritual practices, spiritual discipline, spiritual rhythm, stuff that we'll look at in the next step 11. And we've sometimes lose sight that every single practice is meant to be about entering into the unconditional love of God. And I think the inventory shows me, wow, when I do this, this, and this, what I experience the reality that I'm unconditionally loved, accepted. I'm the small one. He's got me. I'm seeing things through the lenses of love. I think the inventory helps us evaluate, are these just religious habits? Are they now lifeless? And I think it's a really fun thing to be super creative around the spiritual drink station. What was life-giving, filling your tanks up last year, last week, yesterday, might not be what you need today. And I think it's a dynamic, intimate relationship with a real person that can be super creative and vary from day to day. But I definitely think the inventory helps us see, is this practice, is this rhythm topping up, say, for example, my spiritual tanks?
Amen to that. That's a great encouragement. Thanks, Jamie. I've got a lot from that. So as you mentioned, step 11 is next, which is we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and power to carry that out. So we're looking forward to that conversation. Let's finish by, Lars, why don't you say the Serenity Prayer?
Happy to. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.